All right, thank you everybody. Thank you. It's a great turnout for the last session of what has been a very interesting day, I think, looking at the hotspot and all the amazing things that are happening here. So for this session, it's basically divided into two pieces. The first session, what I've asked is I've asked 3 people representing some of our bigger NGOs active in the hotspot to come and give us a talk about what their NGO is doing. How do you make an NGO work in this financial crisis and there's this huge environmental crisis? How are NGOs responding to it? So I'm hoping we can all take away something from that. And start to, a lot of organizations have shared the stuff that they're doing on the ground, and now maybe we can look at some of the other mechanisms that go with it. So the second session after that, then Aziza's going to take over from Sandy and her team. I'll introduce them all when we get there. Basically launching today our learning network for this hotspot and the idea of creating this enabling environment. So I hope that the 2 sessions feed into each other. You wanna?
No, it's fine.
Take Andrew's chair. Okay, good. So in terms of 3 speakers, first of all, firstly, my CEO, Dr. Andrew Venter, you all know him. He's going to tell us a bit about what Wildlands is doing. In terms of the hotspot with the RIT, but we do have a whole other life. And lastly, I'll just come up and share some of the stuff that's making Wildlands tick, and how we're trying to respond to some of our current environmental issues, current issues in terms of trying to find finance to do what we want to do, etc.
Thanks, folks. Okay, it's a 10-minute brief, so this is going to fly through in the hope that we land some points, with the hope that you can actually ask some questions. So I'm literally going to whip through stuff quickly. Bear with me. First thing, Wildlands was formed in 2004 through the merger of 2 trusts, the old Natal Conservation Trust and the old Wildlands Trust, both of whom were established in about 1990. The reason we did that was that we were starting to compete. The 2 entities were competing, so it's quite unusual in the NGO world that actually 2 NGOs managed to work together. Very small at that point. There were about 10 individuals working for the combined trust with an annual turnover of about 4 million. We've grown quite a lot. We're just under 600 people now working for us. Just very quickly, when we articulate our vision, it's a sustainable future for all. It used to be this long, highfalutin, was actually very short, but biodiversity statement. We lost the biodiversity because we don't think it's important anymore. We just want to survive. No, and I mean, hopefully in this room people have got a sense of the shift that's happening around that. And it is about a sustainable future and embedding the biodiversity discussion, ecosystem discussions into that. When we talk about it, we talk about the fact we only have one planet. This is where we live. We'll talk about the 1.5 and the 2s. Talk about the fact that we haven't found another one. We talk about the fact that we are Ubuntu Earth. This is home. We influence it, we shape it. And what we do to the environment influences our well-being, and that circle keeps going around. Just give you a sense of our current spread. We were born in KZN. 2009 we started moving outside of KZN. We manage as a trust according to what we call initiatives, which are linked to districts. So we've aligned with government speak in that space. The red line being the hotspot overlay. Our work is functionally grouped into what we call CBAs, community-based ecosystem, community ecosystem-based adaptation. Sorry, that was late night spell there. Okay, just swap those 2 around. Okay, community ecosystem-based adaptation projects, which is a concept that is very new for us. We launched it as a thinking framework at COP17 in partnership with eThekwini. And it really shapes our priorities, which are 1, talking to the fact that we need to support adaptation as a thinking space from a climate change perspective. We have a focus around ecosystems, and the emphasis there is that good, healthy ecosystems are one of the key tools that will act as a fundamental buffer with some of the changes that are coming. And more importantly, in a developing nation context in particular, and when you're pitching this from a government speak language, communities live off, are affected by, and impact on those ecosystems. And our work is at that interface, fixing ecosystems and focusing on sustainable community development. The yellow dots are our geographic spread of where we have CBISD. We're busy implementing this at the moment, so there's no ways that we would turn around and say that, I think there's 26, 27 of them there, that they're all very cleanly thought out and well structured and representative, but that process we're getting into the organisation as we speak. Just to give you a sense, when we talk about one, just one example, this is in Etigweni city of Durban, Inanda Mountains sits up in this area here. So one of the things that we try and do, we haven't figured out how to do this in all of our sites, interestingly, is define the boundaries of an ecosystem services area, defines where you're working. So the Inanda Mountain, you have the mountain at the top with the grasslands, forests around the side, and then you have these streams that run off the back of that. And that gave us some sort of functional shape of the ecosystem services area, the ESA. And then the key perspective of the communities around that. Then a very simple assessment of what the services are that flow from that. We don't get bogged down at this point in the detail. I couldn't tell you the RAND value on those. We haven't even tried to do that. To be honest, sometimes that confuses the equation and the discussion, as opposed to simply talking about high, medium, and low. Just to give you a sense then as what we do in a CBA, and this is a fairly standard approach. In this context, there's a number of restoration activities, restoring forests, restoring grasslands, restoring streams, underwriting that through the development of good old M&E activities. Easily said, but as many of you will know, not easily achieved, because usually there's no budget for it. Secure the long-term protection of that through community-based stewardship activities, and there was some discussion earlier about stewardship, and finding relevant models that work for the community. They don't have to be the fancy, they don't have to be legislated, it doesn't really matter whether the Premier puts his stamp on it or not. Emphasis from our perspective is everything I've spoken about there before is done through a pro-poor approach. Finding and empowering local community members to nurture their custodianship of that ecosystem services area. And then building on that to nurture those individuals' livelihoods so that they grow as more sustainable entities. Their families are happier, healthier, and they're moving on. So just very quickly, some of the examples. I think many of you have heard of the treepreneur concept. This is one that galvanized us. 2004 we started. Just really discovered it was easy to grow indigenous trees on the East Coast. Simple as that. We're looking for a simple methodology. We have somewhere around 6,000 individuals across 4 provinces growing trees for us now. We'll show you 1.4 million trees this coming year. Wastepreneurs, again working in communities where waste removal is a massive problem because it isn't happening. Simple models of collecting and bartering. Key element to both of those is the barter principle. You can be poor, you can be unemployed, you can be sick, you can be illiterate, you can be innumerate, but you can grow a tree. And once it's grown to that height, it's worth 5 rand. If you've got 10 of those, that's 50 rand. If you've got 100, and you can turn that into food, you can turn that into building material, you can turn that into an education, you can turn that into bicycles through us. And the same thing with collecting recyclables. Flowing off the top of that is the migration of these individuals into other activities. Simple one is the bikepreneur model. We have a bike assembly plant, produce the bikes, and we have individuals who either trade for them, buy for themselves or buy more than one which they sell on into the community. Principle behind that is mobility is critical. Bicycles into communities is critical. How do we get that right? We're starting to get some nice momentum around that in key communities. We have the layer that flows, taking those treepreneurs, those wastepreneurs, moving them into restoration teams as a dual function. And those teams are then contracted to do the planting out of trees back into riverine restoration or forest restoration, removing alien plants. We're starting to work on grassland models, starting to work on wetland models. We have, in some communities, conservation custodians, same principle, taking those individuals, building their resources. This is from Sinkanda. One of the other issues that has really, I guess, changed A lot of activity in the last few years has been that. That was the first rhino that we personally felt and lost. It's one of the Mkanda rhino. And that was in October 2010. We hadn't really been doing anything around the anti-poaching stuff at that point. We had definitely been working around community-based ownership and custodianship of rhino. That has thrown us into that space, and we obviously are doing a lot of work around rhino conservation now. A sense of how this flows out, and look for the patterns. First thing is we don't do everything the same in every area because it's relevant to that environment. So those are the cebas running along the bottom, spread across the provinces. That's a projected number of trees that we will barter and plant back out in those communities this coming year. Same thing for waste. The other thing is critical is the employment factor that kicks into that. And when I was talking about staffing, this is where the staffing sits. Community-based mobilization. An amazing team of youngsters drawn from communities, single mothers, who are being nurtured as facilitators, leaders of tomorrow in their community. The recycling teams, the restoration teams, and the custodianship teams. I think overall somewhere around 7,000 going to 10,000 direct touches at the moment. A lot of our discussion, we'll talk about a number of work opportunities we created, person days, that sort of language. And that's a lot of the funding drive that we now have. A lot of our funding is corporate. About what it used to be about 85%, that's shifted. It's now about 50-50, corporate government. And that is biasing, particularly with the introduction of funds like the Green Fund at the moment, which is about to change our life quite radically. And then I think I just put this up again at the end because this is obviously relevant to this room. And one of the things that strategically we are doing is trying to find out, so we're not looking at any of these grants as a 2 to 3 year relationship. In the back of my mind, we're trying to figure out what is the lifetime relationship between wildlands and that partner on the ground. So the CPF grant is a short-term intervention to help, it's a step up, it's a defined, but it's on our radar screen. And for instance, at the moment, our expansion into the Eastern Cape, which we're literally going in now, is being done directly off the back of CPF partners. The other initiative we have, many of you will know, is our Wild series. Started off as a pure partnership with Ezemvelo. We have some other partners in that. Really interesting model in terms of which we're able to generate core funding for species-related projects. So there's 3 Wild Series events in the Drakensberg area, which puts around about 300,000 rand, 300,000 to 400,000 rand a year into Ezemvelo for primarily bearded vulture work, but other work, and another 150 into National Parks for Golden Gate, and that's it more. Okay, that's enough to bother you.
The red line on the map, what was that?
That's the MPAH, the hotspot boundary.
Okay.
How do you go about choosing where you would place your project?
A mix of different
Is it
circumstances.
people-driven first?
It's a lot of our stuff is people-driven. Okay, so there's a poor community, and then there's a donor associated who likes what we're doing, so you get that marriage right, and then if that starts working, then we start building a cake around that. To be honest, very often donor-driven. The one thing in our space which is different, we're trying to hold on to it, it's quite tough, is that once we start with a community, we'll stick with them through thick and thin. And what that means